Syria, a crossroads of global interests and conflicts. Syria is a country that has become a crossroads of global interests and a theater of war where global ambitions intersect with local conflicts. Its fate has long ceased to be an exclusively internal matter. Every move in this region echoes on the international stage. What does the future hold for Syria? To understand this, we must return to the roots of the ongoing crisis, how this tragic chapter in the country's history began and which forces drew it into an endless vortex of conflicts. The Syrian conflict began in March 2011 as part of the broader wave of protests known as the Arab Spring. This movement, which swept across the Middle East and North Africa, also reached Syria. Initially, the protests were peaceful. People took to the streets demanding better socio-economic conditions, an end to corruption, and greater political participation. However, under Bashar al-Assad's authoritarian regime, where dissent was seen as a threat to power, these demonstrations quickly escalated into open confrontation. The involvement of international players such as the United States, Russia, Iran, Turkey, and the Gulf states further complicated the situation. Each of these actors pursued its own interests, turning Syria into an arena of geopolitical struggle. But the roots of the conflict go much deeper. Syria is a multi-ethnic and multi-religious country where tensions between the Sunni majority and the Alawite elite, represented by the Assad clan, had been simmering for decades. These contradictions played a significant role when political and economic instability intensified. It only took a slight push to ignite this complex mechanism into a full-scale civil war. Yet, to consider this merely an internal conflict misses the larger picture. Behind the scenes lie deeper and often overlooked causes. To understand the origins of the crisis, we need to examine the regional politics preceding the war. Before the conflict, Syria played a vital role in the region's energy strategy. Its geographic location made the country a key transit hub for energy resources from the oil and gas-rich Gulf countries to Europe. Ironically, this strategic advantage became a fatal factor in exacerbating the conflict. In 2009, Qatar proposed a gas pipeline project that would pass through Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, and Turkey, supplying Qatari gas to Europe. This project could have significantly reduced Europe's dependence on Russian gas, which was against Moscow's interests. However, Bashar al-Assad declined to support the project, citing the need to maintain strong ties with Russia. Instead, in 2010, Assad signed an agreement with Iran to build an alternative pipeline, known as the Islamic Pipeline. This pipeline would transport Iranian gas from the South Pars field through Iraq and Syria to the Mediterranean coast, and from there to Europe. This move strengthened Iran's influence in the region, but provoked the ire of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, who saw it as a threat to their interests. The consequences were swift. In 2011, as protests erupted, Gulf states dissatisfied with Assad's policies began actively supporting the Syrian opposition. Each party aimed to gain control over a region that could become a future corridor for their energy projects. Russia, in turn, could not remain on the sidelines. Gas exports form a significant part of its economy, and losing its monopoly on European gas supplies would have been a severe blow. Supporting Bashar al-Assad became not only a geopolitical issue for Moscow, but also an economic necessity. The energy issue revealed itself as a hidden layer of the conflict, which at first glance appeared solely political and social. However, delving deeper into the causes shows that the battle for gas routes played as significant a role as Syria's internal contradictions. As a result, Syria was turned into a battlefield for global confrontation. Yet, the conflict eventually transcended energy routes as external forces with their own agendas became deeply involved. the United States' position on the Syrian conflict, and regional dynamics. From the outset, the United States supported the Syrian opposition. Officially, Washington claimed to advocate for the democratization of Syria and the protection of human rights. However, behind these statements lay strategic goals, weakening Iran's and Russia's influence in the region. Additionally, the U.S. actively collaborated with Kurdish formations such as the Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF, which became a key ally in the fight against the Islamic State, ISIS. American support for the Kurds sparked sharp discontent in Turkey, which saw it as a threat to its security. Turkey, in turn, aligned itself with Sunni groups, including the Free Syrian Army, from the beginning of the conflict. Ankara viewed Bashar al-Assad as the primary obstacle to its policies and actively advocated for his removal. However, Turkish interests were not limited to opposing Assad. They were also directed against the Kurds, whom Turkey considered terrorists due to their ties with the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK. Any prospect of strengthening Kurdish positions in the region was perceived by Turkey as an existential threat. Iran, on the other hand, became Assad's main ally. For Tehran, Syria served as a strategic corridor connecting Iran with Lebanon and the Hezbollah group. Losing Syria would mean a significant loss of influence in Lebanon for Iran, which is why Tehran provided Assad's regime with economic, political, and military support. Iranian military advisors and units, such as the Quds Force, played a crucial role in bolstering the Syrian government's position. The final years of Assad's rule and the fall of Damascus. The final years of Bashar al-Assad's rule were marked by the gradual weakening of his power. An economic crisis, international sanctions, and military defeats eroded the regime's position. The situation worsened in 2025 when large-scale protests and internal intrigues caused a split within the elite. Opposition forces, strengthened by external support, launched an offensive on key cities. The culmination came with the capture of Damascus by opposition forces, supported by Turkey and several Western countries. Bashar al-Assad was forced to flee to Russia, his last remaining ally. This event symbolized the end of one of the bloodiest periods in modern Syrian history, but also opened a new chapter of political vacuum and uncertainty. The Kurdish question, a renewed focus. The issue of establishing an independent Kurdistan returned to the forefront amid the events in Syria. The Kurds, the largest ethnic group in the world without a state, numbered approximately 45.6 million as of 2016. They are spread across the territories of Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Syria, making their aspirations for self-determination a highly sensitive issue for all countries in the region. The prospect of Kurdish independence carries significant geopolitical implications. The fall of Assad has brought the Kurdish question back into the spotlight, adding another layer of complexity to the already volatile Middle Eastern dynamics. After the weakening of Bashar al-Assad's power in Syria, Kurdish formations such as the Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF, and the People's Protection Units, YPG, managed to establish control over significant territories in the northeast of the country. These successes were made possible thanks to their important role in the fight against the Islamic State, ISIS, and support from the United States. Against the backdrop of a power vacuum, the idea of creating an independent Kurdistan has once again become a topic of international discussion. For the United States, an independent Kurdistan could become a strategic ally in the region. On one hand, it would strengthen American presence in a strategically important area. On the other hand, weakening the influence of such countries as Iran, Turkey, and Syria would align with Washington's long-term interests. Supporting the Kurds was a logical step, considering their significant role in combating extremism. Israel is also interested in strengthening the position of the Kurds. Historically, Tel Aviv has viewed the Kurdish movement as a potential ally against a common enemy, Iran. An independent Kurdistan could serve as a buffer state, limiting Tehran's influence in the region. For Russia, the Kurdish question is more complicated. While Moscow supports Damascus and has historically sought to maintain Syria's territorial integrity, its relations with Kurdish formations were also significant. These relations provided an opportunity to influence regional processes and served as a leverage point against Turkey. Turkey is categorically opposed to the creation of a Kurdish state. For Ankara, it represents an existential threat, as Turkish Kurds might be inspired by this example to intensify their movement for autonomy or independence. Turkey views Kurdish formations in Syria as closely linked to the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, which it considers a terrorist organization. Iran also fears the strengthening of the Kurdish movement. A significant portion of Iran's Kurdish population resides in the western regions, and the independence of Kurdistan could lead to a rise in separatist sentiments within the country. The remaining structures of the Syrian state, despite political chaos, also oppose the creation of Kurdistan. The Kurds control northeastern regions of Syria, rich in oil and other resources, and losing them would be a serious blow to the country's economy. The creation of Kurdistan remains an extremely difficult and controversial issue. It requires not only the consent of the Kurds themselves, but also the support of international and regional players, which has so far been unattainable. However, the Kurds, having demonstrated their ability to defend their interests, are unlikely to abandon their aspirations. The future of the region, as well as the fate of the Kurdish people, remains unclear. If you are interested in the Kurdish question in a global context and would like to learn more about the history, culture, and political aspirations of the Kurds, leave a comment. We will prepare a dedicated episode where we will explore how this ethnic group became a significant part of international geopolitics, why their quest for independence sparks so much controversy, and what prospects lie ahead for them today. Your questions and opinions will help us make the episode even more engaging and insightful. What is happening in Syria? Now, with the arrival of a new government, Syria has found itself at the center of a complex geopolitical game. The main task of the new leadership is to preserve the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country, while navigating the interests of global and regional players. The United States and Europe are actively offering assistance, insisting on reforms and a reduction in corruption. Washington continues to support the Kurds, which causes tension with Turkey. Russia remains an important ally due to its military presence, but Syria is striving to reduce its dependence on Moscow in order to attract a broader range of international partners. Iran, one of the key players in the region, maintains significant influence through its allied groups, such as Hezbollah. However, the new Syrian leadership is attempting to limit Iran's presence to improve relations with Arab countries and attract investment from Gulf states. Turkey continues to oppose the strengthening of Kurdish formations in northern Syria. Ankara demands guarantees that Kurdish autonomy in Syria will not threaten its territorial integrity. Meanwhile, Israel conducts regular airstrikes on Syrian territory, targeting Iranian and Hezbollah facilities. These actions aim to prevent the transfer of weapons and the strengthening of military infrastructure near Israel's borders. For Syria's new leadership, this issue has become particularly challenging. Open confrontation with Israel could worsen the situation, but ignoring the attacks undermines the authority of the new government. Thus, Syria's foreign policy now represents a delicate balancing act on multiple fronts. The new government is striving to maintain equilibrium between the support of global powers, such as the United States and Russia, while minimizing threats from Iran, Turkey, and Israel. This diplomatic marathon will be a key factor in determining Syria's future and its role in the region. Syria has entered a new, complex chapter in its history. The departure of Bashar al-Assad has left the country in a state of profound political, economic, and social crisis. The new government, faced with the legacy of war and the influence of external players, is attempting to preserve territorial integrity and establish a renewed dialogue both within the country and beyond its borders. External forces continue to exert significant influence on the situation, and Syria remains at the epicenter of their strategic interests. Each side seeks to strengthen its position, posing a threat to regional stability. Within the country, a fragile balance persists among various ethnic and religious groups, while the issue of Kurdish autonomy remains unresolved. The fate of Syria depends on whether the new leadership can strike a balance between restoring internal order and accommodating the interests of external players. This will require exceptional diplomatic flexibility, decisiveness, and the ability to find compromises. Syria's future is a choice between prolonged instability and the possibility of renewal. Whether the fragmented country can be transformed into a unified state that considers the interests of all parties remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: peace and stability in Syria are possible only through consensus, both domestically and on the international stage.